Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Renee Savoy from the State Department of Education and the Performance Office to welcome you here to our 6th installment of Behind the Numbers. Today, we're going to learn more about navigating and using the EIT and student summary reports. And my two colleagues here today who are going to do all of the talking once I wrap up are Dave Alexandro, also in the Performance Office, and Stephanie O'Day. So I'm looking forward to what they have to say because there are parts of this that I know enough about, and then other parts that are really kind of all new to me. So I will turn it over to Dave.
Thanks, Renee. Welcome, everybody. As Renee said, today we're going to focus on the early indication tool. And we're also going to get into the student summary. And then another report that we created during the pandemic is the EIT for teachers, which allows for rostering so that you can pull data from the early indication tool, the longitudinal data that we have available for the students, and you can provide that data to teachers who don't have access to EdSight Secure. So today, this is kind of what we want to get through. We want to just provide that overview of EdSight. I know we have some repeat customers, so to speak. I see some names I recognize, but there are some people that are going to be seeing the EIT and student summary for the first time. Some of you may not have used EdSight Secure extensively, so we want to make sure that we're trying to be cognizant of the range of audience members today. So as we go through each of these reports, we will touch on the potential uses, and in the potential uses, that's for all of you. We're going to touch on some of the uses that are currently kind of in play already in districts, and we invite any of the attendees to also share how they're using the data. So, and these reports. So at this point, I think I'll just turn it back to you, Renee, just so that we can kind of do that intro survey, and then we'll go back into the presentation.
So as I said, we have about 6 questions, kind of getting a lay of the land as to what people know about and how they use the EIT for teachers and student summary reports. So thinking about your current use of those tools is how you should be thinking about answering the next 6 questions that I'm going to launch in 2 seconds. Here we go. So you respond to the question, and then you go to the next one, you respond to the next one, and once you get through all 6, you'll click submit. Give you another 15 seconds or so. We have about 14 responses in. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And I see you should be able to see the results. I'm not sure if they're popping up on your screen or maybe they are in the chat. And you may have to scroll question by question to see the responses. But it looks like the majority of people are falling into the never category for a couple of them. But then we do have, actually, we've got about a third of the people on the call are using the secure tools to be able to identify suppressed values that appear in, or that don't appear, as it were, in EdSight public reports. So about a third of the people on the call, and about a half are using tools in Secure to create presentations. But for the other questions, it seems like people aren't accessing those tools, and it might be, or not using the information in those tools, and it might be just because they're not quite as familiar with those as maybe other tools within EdSight Secure. So I've closed the poll. I think, would you like me to go to the next slide, Dave?
Yep,
Okay.
sure. Yeah, so that was helpful. And like Renee said, that's kind of been our experience in speaking with EdSight Secure users. That was actually a big push within the last few years coming out of the Performance Matters Forum. We got a lot of requests for essentially duplication of views that are available in EdSight Public, but providing those suppressed values. So it is kind of reassuring that those reports are being used, but it's also nice that everybody's here today because, as Renee said, there are a lot of attendees today who are not really sharing this data, maybe with counselors and teachers, not maybe fully taking advantage of what's available in EdSight Secure, and especially in the reports that we'll talk about today. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but I do want to just make sure that we're clear about the difference between EdSight, or what's sometimes called EdSight Public, and EdSight Secure. So EdSight, as you know, it's accessible to all. We already mentioned that there is a certain level of data suppression, and all of the data suppression guidelines are right on the homepage of EdSight Public. And all of the information for schools, districts, and the statewide level data, all of that is presented in EdSight Public. And everything from enrollment all the way through all of the next gen accountability reports, and then the Connecticut report cards, which Stephanie it has been really integral in developing those reports and providing a nice interface for much of the data that is available in other EdSight reports. On the secure side, so now we have district and school level users who the superintendent has designated as having the rights to access student level longitudinal data. So now we have unsuppressed data. So if you're not currently an authorized EdSight Secure user and you think you should be gaining access to that student level unsuppressed data, you'd have to just reach out to your superintendent. We'll show you a quick slide on that for those that don't have access. But again, we have a variety of reports. Some of them will look very similar to what you've seen on the public side, but we have been able to build out some really extensive and powerful reports that go beyond what's available in EdSight Public. So the next slide is just for those users who don't currently have access to Secure. As I mentioned, the superintendent is the person who designates which users or which people in the district or school should have access to the secure data. And then we have a district level security manager that then accesses the system, and we receive that request and we add the users requested by the LEA security manager. And then once that is coursed, then you'll get notified and we'll be able to go from there. So once you have access, this is what you'll see in the welcome screen. So before Stephanie and I get into the reports themselves, we just wanted to highlight on the bottom left that EdSight Secure Resource Library. So this session will be available, but we also want to let you know that other sessions that we've presented in the past, notes that we've provided, whether it's PDFs or extensive notes and how-tos, all of that is available in the resource library. So if you're new to EdSight Secure, that's a good place to start. So with that in mind, I'm going to jump right into the EIT, or the early indication tool. So Renee, you could just jump to the next slide, please. So the early indication tool is a data analytics and visualization tool. Are you all seeing slide 6, or I don't know if it's okay. I think we're good. Okay,
I
so
think the issue was I was on
data
slide 6,
analytics
but
and
you must have had a
visualization
delay.
tool, and we're using statistical methods to make predictions And those predictions are with the goal of improving student outcomes.
Looks like we lost Dave,
Oh dear.
which I was a little nervous about. Oh, here
He's
he's back.
back. He's back.
Okay.
I think you're just on mute now, maybe, Dave. We can't hear you. Oh, I don't.
Okay. I turned my camera off just in case that was part of the issue.
Yeah.
Okay. That works.
So just going back to the EIT, so I mentioned that we're systematically predicting and improving student outcomes. So we were very deliberate in calling it an indication tool, not an intervention tool, because what we're trying to do is take all of the data that we collect from all of you, all the assessment data that we receive at the state level, and integrate all of those data points together to run these prediction models based on past data, notice trends from students in the past, notice trends that we're seeing in the current students, and try to identify those students that can benefit from additional supports. Okay, so I mentioned we have assessment data, and we have a range of data, everything from discipline to all of the different enrollments. So all the mobility data is available as well. How many times a student has switched schools, how many times they've switched districts, and all of that is viewable for you. So it's not just part of our statistical models that we're running, but it's also all of those data points are available for you to look at in the EIT. So one thing we wanted to do in Connecticut in developing this early warning system was to kind of move away from the traditional early warning system in education, which focuses only on that high school outcome. Oftentimes, early warning systems are focused on the dropout outcome. In Connecticut, what we wanted to do was be able to have an early warning system that would be helpful for students from grades 1 through 12. And one way that we felt would best kind of capture that is to have these intermediate milestones. So what we're calling a mile marker approach. So for students in grades 1, 2, and 3, we're not looking to predict whether or not they'll graduate or drop out from high school. What we're trying to do is look at what is the likelihood that that student will be proficient at the end of 3rd grade on the Smarter Balanced ELA assessment. So research really points to the importance of reading proficiency in the early grades. So we want to focus on that outcome as the first milestone in the EIT or early indication tool. As students advance to grades 4, 5, and 6, now we're adding math as well as ELA, still focusing on that smarter balance at the end of 6th grade as the outcome. So we're looking at most 3 grades ahead anytime we're running our prediction models and trying to identify those students who can benefit from additional supports. As students advance to grades 7, 8, and 9, now we're looking at the on-track indicator. You'll notice that all of these mile markers will be able to point back to the next-gen accountability system. So we're not really introducing any new outcomes that are kind of outside of the comfort or the knowledge base of the teachers, administrators, and all of the education leaders in Connecticut. So for grade 7, 8, and 9, as I mentioned, this on-track indicator, which is part of our next-gen accountability system. And then finally, for our final milestone for students in grades 10, 11, and 12, now we're looking at the likelihood that this student will be college and career ready. So it's just kind of helpful to just get the layout of kind of what our approach was, and now we can kind of get into the report itself. And before we show the report, just kind of talk a little bit about the support levels that I mentioned. So I talked about these statistical models that we run that get at the student's likelihood of reaching a milestone. In the early indication tool, we're not presenting a specific probability or likelihood number to the percent. What we're doing is we're putting students in 3 general groupings just to allow schools and districts to really highlight students based on what we're seeing related to each of the EIT outcomes. So that tallest bar here that you see here allocate 40% of students into this low support group. That medium support group is the next 35% of students as it relates to the likelihood of each of the outcomes. And then finally, the 25% of students who have the lowest likelihood of meeting the academic milestone, those are the students that we really want to highlight for you so that you can notice that based on all of the data available for those students, we think that those students would benefit from the most support as it relates to the milestone of interest for each of those grade bands that I mentioned in the early indication tool. I always point out at this point that these support levels are not deterministic. So when we're putting somebody with a designation of high support, we're not saying that that student will not reach the milestone. What we're saying is based on the past data, and so the trends that we've seen in the past and the trends that we've seen for this particular student, this student would benefit from some additional support to reach that milestone. But it's just important to note that none of these designations of support are calls by the state that a student will or will not meet any of the academic milestones. So this is kind of just a bird's eye view of the EIT. I mentioned already that we're using statistical methods to identify certain students that could benefit from additional interventions. And one thing that we wanted to make sure we built into the EIT was not just the support level, but also color coding those variables that are most integral to the predictions. So as you can imagine, in predicting an academic milestone, such as an assessment score, prior assessment scores are the best predictor. Attendance is also a very strong predictor of student performance, not just in their class grades or course grades, but also on some of the standardized assessments. So we are making sure to highlight those variables that we're seeing students fall kind of below the averages and kind of below those thresholds where we see the student is kind of, not even just focusing, for instance, on attendance, on chronic absenteeism, for instance, because Hetty Chang and the people at Attendance Works have talked about, also identifying those students who are moderately chronically absent, meaning that they're in that 90 to 95 range, approaching 90%. So they might not reach that threshold just yet, but they are students that should be on your radar, and students who might be getting disengaged or might be disengaged and might benefit from some additional contact from people in your school. So as far as how you get to the early indication tool, so on the home page, you see in the student section, which is the left-hand navigation panel, the first report listed is the early indication tool. And you'll see that the EIT was updated today. So, one of the challenges that we have with the early indication tool is that we're pulling in data from so many different collections. And some of those collections don't close until the end of the summer. So for instance, the teacher course student or TCS data collection, which brings in student course enrollments and course outcomes, we don't have that data available until summer school has ended. So as a result, running some of the EIT models is challenging, as you can imagine, for the upper grades in particular. Some of the assessment data we receive earlier, and then once June PSIS closes, then we have attendance data. So it's kind of this rolling data availability as it relates to the state. And that's one of the challenges we have with the early warning system. And for those users, I know there are a couple of some of our power users on the call right now, and you've definitely experienced that, and it's been very helpful in receiving emails from people when you're seeing different things in the EIT when you have questions. But this is where you'd access the report, and then when you're navigating the report, I mentioned those milestones. The tabs of the report kind of sync with those milestones. So we have a chart tab and a data tab for each of those grade bands that I mentioned. So this first screenshot we're looking at is just highlighting those chart tabs, which allows you to kind of see for your school or district, depending on the level of access you have to EdSight Secure, you can kind of just see a quick visual what percent of our students in this particular grade band are in low support, medium support, high support. Then you can double click on any of those colored bands and you can see the list of students. You could also export that list of students. So there's a lot of functionality built into this report, but the chart tab is a good starting point. As Renee mentioned during the survey and asking how many of you use visualizations, perhaps for board meetings, those type of things, we have had some users mention that the chart tabs are helpful as they're trying to just get their head around certain questions that they might have or questions that they're answering for a board meeting. Sometimes these chart tabs are helpful. And then beyond the chart tabs, then we have the data tabs. So we have one record per student. So each row or line in this report is one student. And the student summary, which Stephanie will get into in a few minutes, allows you, rather than look at this kind of table view that it's this really wide row with one student's longitudinal data, by double clicking, you're able to go see the student summary, which has multiple tabs for that individual student. When you come into the EIT, we've highlighted here that you can filter by SACID, you can filter by last name. You can also filter on different numeric variables. If you want to look at certain attendance ranges, if you want to look at students who have moved more than other students, all of those type of things, discipline, students who have had a high number of in-school or out-of-school suspensions, you can also filter based on that. So the next slide that talks about a special focus on attendance, this is just, I mentioned some potential uses. This is definitely something that we've heard from many schools and districts, that they use the EIT and some of the filtering options to get at some of the attendance issues, and they create different, you can see in the filters available, it is a multi-select option, so you could select a range of attendance percentages, and then you can sort columns by clicking on the column names if you want to only highlight based on test scores or any of those type of things. So definitely encourage you to explore the data tabs, explore the filters that are available, and really get to know some of the functionality that's available in the EIT. And as I mentioned, it's up to date as of today. So we've brought in all of the 22-23. So all of last year's data is now in the EIT. Everything from course performance to discipline, enrollments, attendance, assessments, all of that is now in both the EIT and the student summary. So once you've kind of have your list, many users want to export the data. So you'll always have the option when you're in any of the EIT and in the, just in general, EdSight Secure reports, when you have a list table, this list of student records, you can right click and you'll see there'd be an option to export the data. And also in the top right, you'll usually see the three vertical dots. That kebab menu will also have an option to export the data. So I mentioned that the student summary came out of the EIT when we wanted to kind of get away from this single row view of student data. This is when we developed the student summary. So again, this is a EdSight Secure report, a student level report. We're bringing multiple data sources together, and now we're providing this cross-domain longitudinal student level view. So this is different from the EIT in that when you go in, you're looking at individual students in individual tabs, and when Stephanie walks through the report, you'll kind of see how it differs from the user interface. And also when Stephanie gets into some of the potential uses, that will become, I think, evident as you look at some of the screenshots. And as it says there, we're updating that system daily. So when you have new students entering your district or school, when that registration is updated in PSIS, we are then seeing the updates the following day in the student summary. So it's really powerful, this kind of access to real-time data, especially for districts and schools that have a lot of student movement, and you might be waiting on student records, to be able to access longitudinal data for these students, see where they've been enrolled, see what their attendance has been in the past, see whether or not they've been identified as an English multi-language learner. So all of those type of things are really powerful pieces of the EIT, and especially the student summary. So I mentioned you can double click. So on the next slide, this just kind of shows you the two ways you can get to the student summary. The first is, as I mentioned, through the EIT, double clicking a student record, that will take you to the student summary. If you want to go directly to the student summary, you see the bottom option under the student's left-hand navigation option is student summary, so you can get there directly. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, and she's going to walk you through the student summary and the EIT for teachers.
Thank you, Dave. Can you hear me okay? Yep. All right, great. Hi, everyone. Welcome and thanks for attending today. Thank you, Dave, for all of the great information on EIT and saying all that information about the student summary as well, because now I don't have to say quite as much. As Dave discussed, from EIT, you can double click on a record to get into the student summary. That's going to bring you to a version of the student summary with a dashboard, a visual dashboard with a pretty comprehensive look on the student metrics that we have. If you access directly the student summary directly, you'll click on the student summary link from the EdSight homepage, EdSight Secure homepage, and you have an option to either view that version of the student summary with that visual dashboard, or you can just view what we call a history only version with just the tables, mostly tables of data. So the reason you might want to view the history only version is because depending on when EIT was last run, we might not have that dashboard view for a student in the student summary. As we discussed, we just recently ran EIT, so all of the students should be included in the modeling, which means they will have a version of the student summary with that dashboard. But at different points in the year, if we haven't recently run EIT, then you would be able to still access a student summary. It would just be one without a dashboard. So when I talk about this slide here, I recommend using the All Students tab for a complete listing of your students in PSIS registration. That means any day when you go in, on that All Students tab, you'll see a complete list of all the students registered to your district as of the previous day. So this list will include all of the students for whom EIT was run. Also, we have pre-K and K students, which those students also do not have a version of student summary with a dashboard because they're not included in one of the models. And students, what else am I missing, Dave? Is there one more? Dave's
No, I'm here.
pre-K, K,
Mhm.
students who weren't included in the last EIT modeling,
Yeah, I think that covers it,
and that
right?
covers it.
Mhm.
So you'll ensure that you have a full list if you go to this All Students tab. And then you double click right there and you get brought into a version of the student summary, like I said, with just the tables. If you really do want that dashboard view, what you can just do once you find that student on the All Students tab, you can either use the filters across the top, or use the keyword search for last name, or the search by SACIT at the top of the page. If that student shows in the all students list, that means they're registered to your district as of the day before. But if you want to see if they have a version of the student summary with that visual dashboard, you'll just click on you can just click through the other grade tabs actually. And when you find their name on one of those other grade tabs, right to the left of that middle orange box that says all student, you can double click on that and you'll get to the version with the dashboard. And we'll show you the dashboard in the next slide if you haven't seen it or you're not familiar with it. Okay, so the dashboard. So this is just one example. There's a dashboard for each model. This, as you can see, is the Model 4 dashboard, grade 10 through 12. Up at the top, you're going to see those tabs: student summary, that's the dashboard; enrollment history, attendance history, assessment history, lost links history. Those tabs are what you'll see, the history tabs we call them, in the history only version, that version that we have for every student. This student summary tab, what we call the dashboard tab, is the one I was talking about, only for students who were in grades 1 through 12 and were included in the last EIT model. So what I really like about this dashboard look is it includes the EIT support level in the upper right-hand corner. It includes all the current demographic information in the middle. But my favorite thing is this EIT milestone information. If you think back to the mile marker slide that Dave had up with the road, this reminds you, or reminds anyone that you're sharing this information with at a parent meeting or with a team, what the milestone we're talking about is and what the criteria for success for that milestone is. So you have that right on that dashboard. You also have all that discipline and mobility information that Dave was discussing, college and career readiness coursework. Now, of course, this will vary depending on the model. And then you have attendance and assessment information in those gauges toward the bottom half of the page. At the very bottom, where it says core courses failed, if you can see that, that's going to give you a listing of the core courses failed in grade 8, grade 9, grade 10, and grade 11. And they're actually abbreviated, but it's pretty self-explanatory, and we also have it in the help documents. So for this student example, they have not failed any courses. If they failed English, you'd see ENG. If they failed English and science, you'd see ENG SCI. So that gives you a look across many different metrics for that student, all in the one dashboard. And this can be printed. We'll talk about printing in a little bit, but there are some options you can use to make it print out best. But the idea was to give you a one-page document that would be useful in an overview of the historical information that we have in the warehouse for a student in terms of planning best for the student. Okay. So now on the next slide, we'll talk about the history tabs. So this is the enrollment history tab. It shows you just what you would think it would, but I wanted to specify here. We are showing you all the enrollment, which means the student was reported in a PSIS collection across any district in which they were reported. So we actually have, this is the slide that we have a little typo on. It's not back to 2014-15. We are actually showing you enrollment data back to 2006, October of 2006. So if a student was enrolled in a district, not yours, this is what sometimes confuses people. Any district in which a student was enrolled, as long as you enrolled and reported, as long as you currently have that student registered in PSIS, you can see all of that history. And that history includes all of those demographic variables and also the programmatic variables, such as the English Learner Program, if they were enrolled, if they were identified and enrolled. So similarly, the assessment history tab, that's the next one. Again, we maintain that EIT support level up in the upper right and some basic information about the grade and age of the student in the middle of the screen. But then you have some tabular data at the bottom. You have if whatever is available for a student. So on this slide, we've got Smarter Balanced Achievement, SAT, and growth metrics. The Lost Links History tab is similar. You have the subtest information, you have the growth, and you have the mastery status. Something important to note on this is that there is a target variable included in the subtests table and also the growth table. Those are different. So in the subtest table, that target you're seeing is the student's target for the next year. And in the growth table, that target is the target for that current year. And you're seeing the growth achieved out of that target, which equals the percentage of target achieved. Something recently came up where we were discussing this, and you don't have to go into the student summary to see that next year's target for Lost Links. That's also available in the Lost Links Achievement Report. Just like the Smarter Balanced next year target is available in the Smarter Balanced Achievement Report. So if you're in the growth report, you're seeing the target for that school year. If you're in the achievement report, you're seeing the target for the next school year. Now, sometimes because of the complexity of the mapping in order to get all of this information to display for a student, it's a little tricky to make sure that you select a different student and have all that mapping work. You'll know if it doesn't work because you'll be seeing all these strange results. So you just need to close out and go back in either through the homepage or through EIT. So what I recommend for selecting a different student is that you click on the number in the upper right-hand corner that shows you the number of open reports in EdSight Secure. You close all the reports, at the very least, the version of the student summary you're in. So here it says student summary history only. If you have one of those dashboard versions, it'll say student summary, model 1, model 2, model 3, model 4. Close all those and go back to the select a student page for student summary, or you can even go back to welcome to EdSight Secure and start fresh. And like I said, I'm sure some of you have seen these unexpected results, weird things. That's just the mapping. You're not going to see any information that you shouldn't be seeing because of the security measures we have in place. It just, something might not be functioning quite right. So just close everything and start again, and you'll be good to go. Okay, so printing. This is what I was referencing a little earlier. We did create those dashboards so that you would have something that you could print that has information across many data domains. But it might take a little, depending on your setup, the type of computer you're using, whether it's a Mac or a PC, you may have to play a little with these options. What I recommend is that you select show page numbers and deselect all the other options. If you print to the PDF and you notice that something seems cut off or clipped, then you can go back and select that expand clipped and non-visible content option. And that'll put everything at the end in another page potentially of a PDF, but then it'll all be there. For the dashboard pages, we tried to make it so that they would render on one page. So that is student summary. Dave, did I miss anything? I'm checking to make sure Dave's still listening. All right, so we can move on to EIT for teachers. And Dave gave a really nice summary of what EIT for teachers is. We created it during the pandemic in an attempt to get data into the hands of teachers. Going along with those sensible assessment guidelines that came out, the idea was to limit the amount of testing and to use a lot of the information that we already have on a student in order to plan accordingly. So this EIT for teachers basically takes many of the variables in EIT and provides one table instead of all those separate model tables and clicking the multiple data tabs. It's one table, still with one row per student that you can export And then we've created a batch data lookup tool, which is just a fancy way of saying in Excel with some VLOOKUPs and some color coding that you can then put your roster into, your teacher roster. So all you need is the student SACID and the teacher, and then it will populate a nice formatted Excel for them, and then you can share the information from there. And that's basically what this slide says: to facilitate data sharing with teachers in order to decrease the amount of time spent on formal assessment. And there are those sensible assessment practices, which we can link actually for you there as well. So we do often get a question, and Dave mentioned this as well, about, can teachers access their student rosters? How do we upload student rosters into EdSight Secure? Unfortunately, we don't have that capability. So this was our hope. Our hope was to have this report as a way to somewhat answer that question, and allow for the data sharing among teachers. So again, it's custom reports. You can use your roster, and then you have a nice formatted Excel with all of this information that can be shared with your teachers. And this is just a listing of what we have included. We've got more demographics than even what are here listed on the slide, but all those demographics that you saw or that you can see in the student summary, that EIT support level, some current information, including district and school. And we also, I didn't talk about it, but on that student summary, select a student slide, we have days enrolled, and that the default sort on that slide is fewest to most days enrolled. So you're seeing your newest students at the top of that table. We also have that information here. You'll have the attendance and the assessments, mobility and discipline metrics, primary disability, and we recently did change the layout of this file. Back when we first launched this report, we had some different variables, but now we've changed that, and we have the Smarter Balance scores and the growth targets in this table for you as well. And then you'll just see how to access this report. Right underneath early indication tool, you have the EIT for Teachers link, and we did include right there a brief description of this report, as well as a link to some pretty step-by-step data lookup tool instructions. So that's linked there. It's also linked within the report itself. It tells you step 1, export the data, step 2, export the tool, and so on. When you're in the report, these are the tabs you'll see. Tabs are just those across the top right under where it says early indication tool. You've got the all variables tab first. That's what this is. And this is where you'll be doing the exporting from if you decide to use the tool. This is going to have some variables that are blank for students, because remember, we combined all 4 of those models. So some of the variables are not applicable to certain grade levels, but it allows for that one table to be used in this tool, and not have to go back and forth between different model tables. You can filter at the top using the filters you see, and all of the variables have definitions in the glossary and data definitions, which is linked in the resources tab. There is another tab, it's the selected variables tab. So this, you can see, is now broken out by range, pre-K3 grade range, 4, 8, and 9, 12. So I remember I talked about the missing variables for some of the students based on grades. So this is an effort to just limit the variables to those applicable to the grade range, and it has a 2-year look back. And again, the variables that were included are included in hopes of informing instruction. Exporting has changed a little since when we first launched EdSight Secure. You used to have to hover over those kebab or snowmen dots in the upper right. Now you can click anywhere on the table and click Export Data, and the dialog will appear. This is that Resources tab, still in that EIT for Teachers report, and you can see that under the how-to documents. The second one is how to use the report. And on the right, you have that EIT for Teachers batch data lookup tool. That's the Excel, the formatted Excel. So everything you need is right here for you on the resources tab as well. And this is just a quick screenshot of one of the first step, or actually the last step in using the data lookup tool. So it gives you step by step, and then this is what it will look like. You have the tool on the left, you have your student SASIDs and their teacher name from your roster. You copy and paste it in, and it will populate all the student information. And from there, the how-to also tells you, like, you can filter and copy and paste into separate Excels for your sharing with your teacher or whatever other secure method you have for sharing. But you'll notice, like, the support level is highlighted according to the value, and then some of the other metrics included are also highlighted and shaded, I should say, similar to what you've seen in EIT. I think that's all we have. So now we would like to open it up for questions.
I did receive one question via email, so I just wanted to address that. So Jason Teitelbaum is one of our super users that I referenced. He's in the Bloomfield district, and he referenced the rigorous coursework letters. So that's another project that I'm involved with, where we use these statistical models to not, kind of the opposite of the early indication tool, where we're looking at students who might struggle to reach a milestone. Now with the rigorous coursework letters, what we're trying to do is expand on those early attempts to identify students who can handle more advanced coursework. So it used to be just a file that we would receive from College Board based on PSAT scores. And what we've done is we've used all of the longitudinal data that we have available, and especially the smarter balance assessments in the middle school grades, to allow us to identify earlier those students who may benefit and may do well in rigorous courses. So Jason's question was about the inclusion of that data in the student summary or the early indication tool. So currently we're not bringing that in, but that is something that Stephanie and I can look at as because that data is available. But I did want to point out that those letters are available. So I don't know, Renee, if you can go back to, I think slide 5 has an overview of just the welcome screen. There's a link to the rigorous coursework report. And that link, just like the early indication tool, so under instruction, the third link under the instruction, which is the third column from the left, the instruction tab has a link that says students receiving rigorous coursework letters. So if you have students who are new to your district and you're wondering whether or not those students received letters, that report is linked at the student, the SASID level. So we're not linking it to the enrolled school at the time of when the letters were sent. That's a daily update that when we update the EIT and the student summary, and we want to make sure that those rosters, so to speak, are up to date, we're doing the same for the rigorous coursework letters. So like I mentioned, Stephanie and I can talk about if there's a good spot to add it to the student summary, but while we kind of figure that piece out, if you ever do need to look and you have a new student and you're wondering, did that student receive a rigorous coursework letter, you can click on that students receiving rigorous coursework letters report in EdSight Secure, and that student, if they received a letter, will be listed in your school or district.
And I'll say if there are others who maybe want to ask a question and by raising their hand, I can go ahead and unmute you too. I just want to let you know that, but it sounds like something just popped up in the chat. So can you share some ways that districts are using information in EIT or student summaries to make improvements?
Yeah, the Performance Matters Forum, both Plainville and District 19, which is E.O. Smith Regional District, both of them got into their use of data through an equity lens. And E.O. Smith specifically, what they're trying to do, because they're a regional high school, drawing from so many different feeder schools, and they're a standalone district, so oftentimes they don't have access to the feeder school data. So those students, until those students, we do summer roll up, and those students are now enrolled in EO Smith. That's one of the struggles that they've had. So they're often relying on the feeder school to make recommendations about course placement. So both the principal and superintendent talked about the importance of having assessment data, and we met with them. We went on site and kind of talked about the additional data that's available from the course level data that is integrated into the student summary, and that's something. So that's one use that has helped in identifying those students from a course placement perspective. Another thing, in talking with other districts, the mobility data has been helpful. So, oftentimes when you talk about an early indication tool or an early warning system, you're oftentimes focusing on the malleable variables. What are the variables that we can help? So we can help this student come to school more. We can improve their attendance. We can help them with their assessments. But how can we help them with mobility? And so what some districts are doing is not thinking of that mobility count as a number that they can change, but using that mobility count as another data point to say, hey, this student is in their fifth school in the last 5 years. So you can see that enrollment data in the student summary. And now you can have a student that you're checking in with maybe more. So that's another example of what some schools and districts have done, is use student summary data to get a better feel for some of their newer students, and just get a quick look at their longitudinal data, so that perhaps they'll do more check-ins and just have a better feel for the students in front of them.
Are there other comments or questions, or does anyone want to share how they've used these tools in their districts? Again, feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you.
I think really too, Renee, just the idea that Dave shared at the beginning, it's just the transfer of records really more quickly. So I know a lot of users look at the student summary. Of course, there's also the English learner roster report in EdSight Secure, but that identification of a student as an EL when they're new to your district is a common example that we hear. The same thing can be said for history of having an IEP as being a student with a disability under IDEA, because in that enrollment history tab, you see all the way back. And we've had districts identify students who maybe left the state, came back, and had previously been an English learner, and then something happened that wasn't communicated, and they were able to see that through EdSight Secure as well. So I know it's not a systemic improvement. Well, possibly it is if it's a problem that's happening a lot, but that's just an example of making improvements in their practices as far as ensuring students are correctly identified and getting the services that they need.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That whole idea of ever L, ever ML, when you can go back and look at, not just from a demographic standpoint, was a student identified as an English learner, a multilingual learner, to be able to click on the lost links history and see when it was they achieved mastery. Just that history is very helpful. So, you know, we have seen some districts where, you know, it's helped identify questions that they have. Why did this student change status for whatever particular variable they're looking at? So it allows them to follow up with the previous district or help with a parent meeting or those type of things. Jason also asked about CT SEDS data. And we have had some challenges with CT SEDS just because it's a new system. So the integration of CT SEDS data into the EIT and the student summary has been a little bit more of a challenge as we get into primary disabilities, especially time with non-disabled peers. Some of that data last year was not as clean as in years past when we got it from the June PSIS collection. So and it actually has allowed us to clean up some of the inconsistencies that exist across the systems. So there's definitely something that is on our radar, but as that CT SED system continues to improve, that's going to be an area where we will incorporate more of that data as time goes on.
I think as we hit the top of the hour, I wanted to thank both of you for taking the time to do this and for the people who took time out of their afternoon to attend. And I think there's a lot to consider with these tools. And I do think that there are a lot of different ways that they can be used locally. And I know that the two of you have a lot of interaction with the districts, whether it be through some sort of professional learning opportunity in the district, or maybe it's virtual, or maybe it's just a phone call. I would say, I think I can speak for both Dave and Stephanie in that they absolutely invite your input, feedback. We want to make these tools better. We want to enhance them so that they help you to achieve your goals. And so don't hesitate to contact either individual or me. You can try to go through me too. I'll share what I know to help you answer some of the burning questions you have in your districts and just hopefully work to improve student outcomes sort of collectively. So thank you for coming. We can hang on if there are other questions, and we hope you have a great weekend and a happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.